What's going on, everyone? It's LJ. 3 or 4 times a year, YouTube vinyl community member Guess I'm Just a Spud Boy, better known as Ottavio, and I trade in records with a friend just like you always did in the old days. Now, what's worked out really well and been really cool is that every time records go back and forth, we'll stick a little post-it note or something to that effect in the album jacket or to the album just to give you an idea of why'd you decide to send it, what's so cool about it, why did you like it, and why might you like it. So we agreed not to open the boxes live this time, although that would normally be the case, simply for the fact that there's a good chance neither one of us had heard the records in the box before. So how entertaining of a video can it be when 12 times in a row you say, great cover? Not too much. So over the last week or so, I've spun through them, and now here are my thoughts on them, and also why Ottavio decided to send them. So starting with the Kim Mitchell EP, Kim's first EP in 1982 after leaving Max Webster. Ottavio says generally a dime a dozen, but the Kim Mitchell debut EP is a toughie to find. Almost want to give this a spin, as Pi Dubois wrote the lyrics. Pi Dubois was instrumental in Max Webster and writing a lot of the lyrics there for the Max Machine. I've never seen and never heard Kim Mitchell's first EP. I can say this though, it's a killer rock and roll record. It opens with Kids in Action, which is a huge anthemic song. Misdemeanor, which follows it, has like a cool David Lee Roth kind of, hey, I'm a sexy guy, kind of spoken interlude thing there, which definitely reminds me of Van Halen. Overall, very, very cool EP. Another thing that's really neat, and this is probably useless to Canadian viewers, but it's on the Anthem label. And it's useless because you can probably find Anthem records everywhere and you're sick of seeing them. But down here in the northeastern United States, once you get into Canadian rock, the Anthem label is kind of like the Blue Note label to jazz collectors. You just can't find it, and it's not around. That was a great record. Next up is a library copy of the Jeff Healey Band's See the Light. Library records are usually completely dished. Wow, Canadians are really good to their library. Much better than Americans. So Ottavio says, the pride of Etobicoke neighborhood. We all knew Jeff as kids and lost plenty of brain cells in his basement while he played for us. He became huge, and we lost touch. Here's what I didn't realize. Jeff Healey from the Jeff Healey Band is the same cat that was in the movie Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze. He's playing the guitar on his lap in the bar. This was a really, really cool record. I am not a big blues fan by any stretch of the imagination, but this is rock solid 80s blues rock, which is different than 70s blues rock, which was more dirty. So it's almost more polished, more produced. Really, really solid record, and there's as much variance here as you could possibly get when it comes to 80s blues rock. But it's definitely a stomper. There's some really killer tracks here. I know Jeff recently passed away not all that long ago, and what I didn't know was the song Angel Eyes that was beaten to death with a sledgehammer by FM radio when it was released was Jeff Healey and was on this album. So I've heard enough of that song to last me a lifetime, but the rest of the album was really cool. Here's another album by another band I had never heard of before, and this is 5440. Ottavio says, I Go Blind by Hootie and the Blowfish, written by these guys. This is their third LP. Hope you like it. They're from outside Vancouver, Canada. A must-have in your Canadian collection of rock. This was a really, really cool album. I have a pretty decent 80s rock collection. And by 80s rock, I mean stuff that this will fit nicely right into. This is from 1987, and it blends perfectly with things like U2's Joshua Tree, Depeche Mode's Music for the Masses. It's definitely more dark than jangly, so it wouldn't blend in too well with like an REM. It was fantastic. I loved it. Next up is a record I already had, and that's Kony Hatch's debut. What made it cool, again, is that this is a Canadian copy on the Anthem label. That I didn't have. Mine's a US press. So Ottavio says, on Anthem Records, this has your name written all over it. This band shoulda, coulda, woulda been huge. They were kind of big. They were pretty well known here. There was a few albums. This one was produced by Kim Mitchell from Max Webster. That's probably why it sounds as good as it does. At the point, and this was 1982, this was about as knife-edged hard rock as you could get. As times and albums went by over the next few years, they definitely got more hair metal-y. They never really quite hit the hair metal point, but the 2 albums that came after this got less hard rock and more hair metal. Still a very cool ad, and on the Anthem label, it's neat to have the Canadian pressing in the collection. Now, nothing needs to be said about this one except, like the last one, it's Canadian pressing. So I have a US pressing of this, of course. Ottavio says, no comment, free to a good home, another holdover from the Vinyl Museum. How can you tell? So the Vinyl Museum is a Toronto hallmark. And now that I've traded records back and forth with him a number of times over the years, you can't miss the stamp of the Vinyl Museum. First of all, this is the wrong inner sleeve for this record, thankfully, but it's been stamped by the Vinyl Museum. And the Vinyl Museum is notorious for stamping Bible quotes or biblical quotes on all of its record sleeves. I don't know why they do it. I don't know how or when it started. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Because it's a little maddening when it's really on the proper inner sleeve, and I was glad this one wasn't. But then again, it's a hallmark of it being a Canadian record, and that's what this is all about, right? Next up, we have Superstars Salute the New Massey Hall. New Massey Hall? Superstars? What superstars? Lots of them. Rush, Prism, Trooper, Toronto, April Wine, Loverboy, Red Rider, Max Webster. Alright, so there's our superstars. But what's up with the New Massey Hall thing? Well, according to the note, Roy Thompson Hall was supposed to be the new Massey Hall, and word spread of demolishing Massey Hall back in 1983 or so. Toronto was outraged, and so now they have two halls. And that's what makes these trades so cool. Where else can you get that history, that story? When you just find the record in the wild, it doesn't speak like that. A very cool comp with some very cool tracks. We have Rush, Closer to the Heart, and so forth. What was even more cool is that it came with this little contest card. Your entry had to be submitted before December 31st, 1982. One thing I did notice about that is that residents of Quebec were not invited to participate. Why? For Quebec. And our last appearance of Kim Mitchell, 1984's Akimbo A Logo, an album I didn't have, I rarely see, and I had never heard, with the exception of the track Go for Soda. That track I knew. That was a little popular back in the 80s. Now, our note says we call it pop, and you guys call it soda. So why is a guy from Ontario referring to it as soda is beyond us. But it worked, and Kim Mitchell penetrated the often sought-after U.S. market, which Max Webster never did. And that is 100% correct. Overall, a solid rock and roll album. Nothing mind-blowing, but more teetering on AOR than hard rock. It's on Alert Records from Canada. Definitely one that I was excited to and wanted to add to the collection. The EP smokes it, hands down. And I know Kim has a couple more records that came after this that I'll be interested to get into the collection at some point in the future. Not at all a bad album. Again, the EP was just better. Next up, an album I had never seen or heard of before, 1977's Jackson Hawk. According to our note, it's going to be featured in an upcoming Spud Boys that came from Canada, because these guys were not from Toronto. Sort of a classic rock country hybrid, something like the Eagles. Always mixed them up with Jackson Browne as a kid. And that's a pretty fair description. It really is a lot like the Eagles. And kind of a little Jackson Browne too. Maybe a little barroom honky-tonk in there for good measure. And you got yourself a 70s pop rock obscurity. Pretty cool album. Next up, a 1983 reissue of the 1977 debut from David Wilcox called Out of the Woods. I had not heard of this before, but just looking at that cover and looking at that fender, you know it's something that's going to be a really cool album. Now, according to our note, the debut is a registered weapon in the province of Ontario. This guy just melts faces, and he still kicks ass. Love this record. And it was very cool. It was a lot like Jeff Healey. It was it sounded like 80s blues, kind of that Robert Cray or Jeff Healey sound. What's neat about that is it was originally released in 1977. Again, reissued in 1983, so I don't know if the record was remastered or remixed for release so it would blend in more in the 80s. Neither here nor there, though. Still a very cool late 70s but 80s sounding blues rock album. Another artist and record I had never heard of, and this is 1980s BB Gabor. And again, this is why you trade, because these are the things that somebody that grew up with it, lived it there and not here, can teach you and help you with. And that's why you swap records with one another. Anyways, according to our guide, legendary gigs at Grossman's Tavern. Soviet, things looked good. And then BB decided to call it quits and took his own life, which is too bad. This is a Canadian pressing on Anthem Records. Again, I love seeing that label spin. And this was one quirky record. I did not remember Soviet, although in Metropolitan Life, Soviet Jewelry is the name of the song where that lyric is from. In Metropolitan Life, they fit right in with that kind of early 80s MTV Vapors, kind of Devo kind of sound is what they reminded me of. The record is quirky as all get out. Moscow Drug Club. Check out that song on YouTube and you'll see exactly what I mean. But check out Soviet Jewelry while you're at it as well, or even Metropolitan Life as tracks, because it was a really cool record, and had it not been for Ottavio, it's one that never would have been added to the collection. So thank you for that. It's very cool. Here's one I was stoked when I saw it in the box, and that is because I love Japan. One of my absolute favorite 80s, late 70s, early 80s, non-metal, non-hard rock, synth pop bands. Absolutely love Japan. Not a fan of anything David Sylvian did as a solo artist, but here, magic. According to our guide, damn, this one just sounds so good. Lots of Japan EPs and singles were released in Canada, where we love them. Rest in peace, Mick Karn on bass. So as I mentioned, it was released in parallel with Tin Drum, so you have The Art of Parties from that album as a track on this 4-track EP. The other 3 tracks I hadn't heard. They seem to be non-album only singles or tracks, which was very cool, and this is a killer one to add to the Japan collection. Last out of the box, more Japan. And this is another one I did not have. So with all the studio albums now in tow on the shelves, it's really these obscurities that I'm looking for, get really excited when I see. And this is a special edition 5-song EP. It's another Canadian, UK-only greatest hits EP, released when the band just hit the stratosphere up here on Hansa Records. Absolutely wonderful. This is that early Japan energy that I absolutely love. Somewhere right around the first 2, maybe 3 records. Those big, cool bass lines. Absolutely loved it. It starts off with a cover of I Second That Emotion, which starts off a little weird, but then it really kicks in. And then throughout the rest of the album, it's just Japan. That's it. That's the box. That's the trade this time around. Ottavio, I know you dug your records, and I'm really glad that you did. Everyone else, I hope you dug this. Feel free to leave a comment about any one of these records if you have one. Again, for the most part, many of them were new to me. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys in the next video. Later.